The Washington State Office of Financial Management came out yesterday, and I had heard rumblings that it wasn't going to be good, their latest budget projection, and it's not. Projected state revenue through 2029 is now down by $903 million. So their projected revenue that they're bringing into the state through 2029, the projections that they had actually subtract about $1 billion. So every time they come out with a new projection, it gets worse and worse and worse. And one of the lines I found interesting in their explanation as to why says the changes in the forecast are primarily the result of a weaker taxable sales forecast for retail and construction, lower state agency revenues, and a reduction in projected real estate excise tax returns. So when I see that, none of that is a surprise to me, especially as we are on the precipice of the largest tax increase in state history for businesses. And we've had a very anti-business environment in our state for really the better part of a decade. And so businesses are leaving. And that means, of course, that your sales tax receipts are going to be down. And as far as construction, what did our friends at the builders, the Rental Housing Association of Washington, what did they warn? You pass things like rent control? You think anyone's going to want to build in this state? You think we're going to have people coming in here and building new buildings, building homes? You know, all the environmental regulations that you have put that have increased the cost of building a home by tens of thousands of dollars? Of course not. They warned it. We all saw this coming. So that's what's happening. People aren't building stuff here. They're not building apartment buildings because the policies around restricting landlords are insane, and rent control. They're not building homes. Too expensive to do that. So none of this is a surprise, and you can tie it directly back to Democratic policies. But of course, they can't blame themselves, right? And they feel like they don't have to take the blame because they have complete control over state government, so they can just gaslight and hope that they can stave off any sort of electoral consequences for it. So Bob Ferguson's statement in response to this isn't a surprise. He said, "For some time, my budget team has been preparing for a challenging revenue forecast. Today's forecast is disappointing, but not surprising. Unfortunately, we are also grappling with the impacts of President Trump's big betrayal bill, which includes billions in cuts to Washington state for programs such as Medicaid and food for hungry kids." No, it doesn't. "Approximately 28% of our budget consists of federal investment, so these cuts will have adverse impacts for many Washingtonians." He says, "As I write my first budget, I will be focused on delivering a balanced budget that maintains core services to the people of our state." And you might say, well, didn't he just write a budget? Well, you know, he came into office in late January, so technically the next time would be a budget all of his own making. But you know, first of all, he calls it the big betrayal bill and says it cuts all this money to Medicaid. No, what it says is you have to prove that you are deserving of the benefits. Wow. So if we're getting cuts to Medicaid, that will mean that we have less people who were able or willing to prove that they needed the benefits. So I don't see what the problem is there. The other issue where he says 28% of our budget consists of federal investments, so these cuts will have adverse impacts for many Washingtonians. You know, Donald Trump has been threatening blue states with withholding federal funds for a variety of reasons, but none of those reasons are worth thrusting us into a budget crisis by just trying to stick it to Donald Trump. You know, hey, strip DEI out of government. We should do that anyway. Because DEI is racist. It's backward. Hey, boys shouldn't be playing against girls. If you let them play against girls, we're going to keep money from you. Well, boys shouldn't be playing against girls anyway. Hey, you know, you can't be a sanctuary jurisdiction that thwarts the efforts of lawful immigration enforcement being conducted by our federal agents. And if you continue to do that, well, we're going to withhold funding from you. Well, we shouldn't be a sanctuary jurisdiction anyway. We can welcome immigrants who come here legally, and we can make sure that we don't stand in the way of the federal government as they're carrying out the duties that they're allowed to under federal law. So this is all about the blame game. And of course, we've talked about this a lot. Bob Ferguson has been on the road all over the place, amping up his attacks on Donald Trump as it pertains to the economy. This was just a few days ago. The Trump administration's chaotic tariff implementation is already wreaking havoc on Washington's economy, and our businesses' ability to plan for the future. And of course, as you guys well know, what is wreaking far more havoc on Washington's economy and our businesses' ability to plan for the future? I don't know. The $9 to $12 billion in new taxes that is going to be on their shoulders in a matter of days? I would say that if you're saying that the impact of Trump's tariffs might be $2 billion a year for Washington's economy, but your taxes are going to be $9 to $12 billion a year, gosh, which one is wreaking more havoc on our businesses? That's very obvious. I saw this article in King 5 News that pissed me off but made me happy at the same time. Let me explain. So the headline in King 5 News, of course, is like the furthest left TV station in the Seattle market. And so, I never have high expectations for their willingness to call out Democrats for policies, et cetera, et cetera. But this is the headline. New Washington state taxes surprise, confuse business owners. I read that headline and I thought, if you're surprised by the new state taxes, then you're not consuming the correct media outlets. If these taxes, the largest in our state's history, are catching you by surprise days before their implementation, then you should probably find different news outlets to consume. I would guess that they haven't done a good enough job preparing you for the eventuality of these new taxes, which should have been covered wall to wall for many months. So that was the first thing that pissed me off, is like, wow, no one should be surprised. So that's the media's fault and individual citizens for not being up on these things. It said business owners in Washington state express shock as $12 billion tax package takes effect, impacting diverse services from art classes to licenses. Sweeping new taxes and fees are hitting Washington state, and many business owners say they were completely unaware of the changes until recently. Wow, that's shocking. I would love to live in such a bubble. The change is part of a $12 billion tax and fee package. And the difference there, I say $9 billion. Some people say it's closer to $12 billion. I think are you including fees or just taxes? So the $12 billion tax and fee package signed by Governor Ferguson in May are being described as one of the largest revenue increases in state history. They affect a wide range of services from storage facilities and security staffing to marriage licenses, hunting and fishing permits, and real-time classes such as art or fitness instruction. Again, if people watched Undivided, they would know all of these things and absolutely would not be caught completely off guard by them. And then there's this story they tell in this article. And this is what kind of gives me hope. Like, okay, maybe people who haven't been paying attention are now going to start paying attention. We need something to sort of put us over the edge so people start to wake up. It says the Shaw family, who opened Creative Hands Art Studio in Bothell a decade ago out of their home, said they were stunned when they learned of the changes. Quote, "We did not know about this until last week. It was a big surprise." Effective October 1st, their pottery classes will now be considered live presentations and subject to a 10.2% sales tax. One of the family members said, quote, "It was like, is this real? We weren't able to accept that this is for real." They say the additional tax will be passed on to customers, and some of those customers are already leaving. And so the cycle continues. What did I say off the very top? That the Office of Financial Management attributed this $900 million reduction in their outlook, fiscal outlook, to? Well, one of the big things was a weaker taxable sales forecast and retail and construction. So what happens is we have businesses who decide to leave because you've decided to tax them to make up for a deficit. So in taxing businesses more to make up for a deficit, more businesses leave, or they have to pass those taxes along to their customers, so fewer customers buy their goods, and it just contributes to the cycle that now you have less revenue than you projected. And they're just going to repeat, rinse and repeat. So what will happen in January, now that they're down another $900 million in their projected revenue? Well, they're going to say, well, we've got to tax more, right? We got to tax more. What else are we going to do? And then what will happen? They'll tax more. It'll hit businesses. It'll hit other people, maybe real estate, and then people will leave. And that's less revenue that they have coming into their coffers. And it is going to ruin us economically. And none of it's attributable to Donald Trump. None of it is Donald Trump's fault. In 2019, Republicans in Olympia were warning Democrats to stop spending so much money on things like laser hair removal for transgender inmates, $19 million Office of Equity. They said, hey, the economy's not always going to be so strong. We're going through a great period right now, but we need to save for a rainy day, and we can't keep ballooning the size of our budget because we're going to be in trouble one day. Well, one day is today. One day was actually probably a year ago when we realized how bad the budget outlook was. So they were warned about this every year for 5 years. And every year for 5 years, they said, kick rocks. We don't care. We have all these things we want to spend money on and grow the size of government. And now who's paying for those decisions? You are. I am. Businesses like this pottery class that now are categorized as a live presentation. And so they're hit with a 10.2% sales tax. How much longer do you think they'll be open? Probably not very long. So it's really not hard to figure out the cycle that the state is in with Democrats. What's tricky is to get through to the population of people who, if they hear anyone blame Donald Trump, they automatically believe it. Oh, yeah, Trump's bad, so he must be to blame for this. And that's why Bob Ferguson is doing it, because he needs a scapegoat. And he doesn't want it to be him, and he doesn't want it to be his political party, because they want to stay in power. So we need to help our friends and neighbors understand that not everything is Donald Trump's fault. Not everything can be blamed on Donald Trump. Share with them some news articles from 2019 where Democrats were being warned to stop what they were doing or this exact scenario would happen.